Corporate boycotts. We've pulled on them before, but this one is a doozy. Let's talk about Anheuser-Busch's Bud Light debacle, which we now have polling numbers back on, and it's pretty clear they stepped in a hornet's nest. Anheuser-Busch has used transgender model Dylan Mulvaney to promote its Bud Light brand of beer. Does this make you more likely or less likely to purchase Bud Light beer? 19% of American adults say more likely, but 40%, more than twice as many, say less likely. 37% say it doesn't make much difference. Let's compare that to almost exactly 2 years ago, when a similar corporate beverage giant got political. After the Georgia legislature enacted a new election law requiring voter ID, Coca-Cola was one of the companies that publicly condemned the law. Does that make you more or less likely to purchase Coca-Cola products? Then, 25% said more likely, and 37% said less likely. That's a much better situation for Coca-Cola. Though at the time, only 30% said it made no difference, and now a much higher 37% do. So overall, why are the numbers worse for Anheuser-Busch than Coca-Cola? Well, the clear standout reason is that the issue is potentially more divisive. Keep in mind, a strong majority of Americans actually support voter ID laws. And as you'll see, transgenderism, as an issue in the corporate sphere, doesn't have much support. But why is the doesn't make much difference result higher now than then? Here's a hypothesis. Perhaps people are more burned out or accustomed to corporations getting political. Maybe they don't have the energy for this boycott anymore. Well, the next question is going to undermine that theory. Probably the more likely answer is that less people drink Bud Light than Coca-Cola. Now let's get into a few select demographics. Here's age. A plurality, though only 33%, of 18 to 39-year-olds say they are more likely to drink Bud Light. 26% say less likely. And about 1/3 say it doesn't make a difference. Now, 18 to 39-year-olds are certainly more permissive when it comes to LGBT topics, and perhaps you'd think the more likely response would be a bit higher than 33%. I found this interesting article from Time magazine, written almost 10 years ago, however. At the time, 44% of the 21 to 27-year-old age demographic hadn't even tasted Bud Light. And the brand had, even then, started aggressively targeting younger drinkers, since they acknowledged at the time they were facing tough competition from craft beer. So maybe Anheuser-Busch is thrilled by the results among 18 to 39-year-olds here, but are they going to buy the beer? Now let's look at that next demographic. That's a killer. 4.5 times as many middle-aged Americans say they will be less likely to buy Bud Light now, rather than more likely. I'm guessing that's where the bulk of Bud Light buyers sit, because when you look at the 65 and older crew, who most likely drink less in general, 49% of them say this controversy doesn't make a difference to them. So how political is this controversy? Well, somewhat political. 58% of Republicans say they will be less likely to buy this beer. And again, here's a guess, but I suspect they're the biggest existing consumer base for Bud Light. Here's a chart I found from 2018, and I'll link the Bloomberg article, but it's behind a paywall, showing that the Bud Light brand does indeed have a Republican skew. Only 17% of Republicans say they're more likely to buy Bud Light here, and 23% say it doesn't make a difference. Independents are pretty inflamed as well, with more than twice as many also saying they'll be buying less Bud Light than as saying more likely. And even Democrats also say they'll be buying less Bud Light than more. But a plurality, 48%, say it doesn't make a difference. So they're kind of sitting this one out. But if Anheuser-Busch was counting on some huge politically driven boycott coming to their rescue, these numbers seem to imply it isn't going to happen. Let's also stop in on the race numbers. Hispanic and white Americans have pretty similar signals here. And although 39% of black Americans, almost as many as Hispanic and white Americans, say they'll be less likely to buy Bud Light, only 7% of them say they'll be more likely. File this away for future use. Some beer drinkers have called for a boycott of Anheuser-Busch products because of their using Dylan Mulvaney in their promotions. Do you support or oppose a boycott of Anheuser-Busch? 37% of Americans strongly support the boycott, and a total of 55% at least somewhat support it. 30% are opposed, and only 18% are strongly opposed. Men favor the boycott slightly more than women, but here are the age numbers. Even though 18 to 39-year-olds were the most likely to say they'd be buying more Bud Light, The overwhelming majority of them, 57%, at least somewhat support the boycott, and only 26% are opposed. Middle-aged Americans are roughly equally in favor, though with a higher strongly support signal, and Americans over 65 are basically split to slightly opposed, though they were also least likely to have a personal stake in this, as the previous question pointed out. Though perhaps over the years, Anheuser-Busch has built up more brand equity with them. Now let's get to the race numbers. Again, white and Hispanic Americans have almost the exact same response, and it's black Americans that stand out. They're least in favor of this boycott of any of the demographics. Only 32% of them support it, 29% strongly. 42% are opposed. Why are black Americans the most opposed to an Anheuser-Busch corporate boycott? Post your theories in the YouTube comments. Here are the party numbers, and again, it's more of a Republican thing. 67% of them support the boycott, 51% strongly, though a majority of independents also support it, 54%. But look at that Democrat number. 44% of Democrats also support a boycott of Anheuser-Busch because of their use of Dylan Mulvaney in promotions. Time and time again, we've confirmed this type of signal elsewhere in our polling. A solid chunk of Democrats, between 40 and 50%, are not on board with this gender ideology stuff, though whether or not it affects their voting patterns is up for debate. Here's some further confirmation. In general, do you think major corporations give too much attention or not enough attention to transgender issues? 52% of Americans say too much, and only 18% say not enough. 15% say it's about right. Men and women overall aren't too far apart here, with 53% of men and 51% of women saying corporations focus on transgender issues too much. But here's men and women over and under age 40, and there is a clear standout. Women under 40 are least likely to say that corporations are giving too much attention to transgenders by a pretty considerable margin, though they're only split 34 to 30% on the issue. But here's age, and even the more permissive 18 to 39-year-old demographic says corporations focus on trans issues too much by a 43 to 26% margin. Middle-aged Americans have the strongest signal, saying too much over too little by over a 5 to 1 margin. And even though older Americans are somewhat checked out on this whole situation, they're still saying too much by a factor of almost 4 to 1. But again, is this just a political boycott? Well, yes and no. Republicans say too much over too little by 67 to 16%, and independents, like before, follow along not far behind. But look at Democrats. A plurality of them, 41%, say too much attention is focused on transgender issues by corporations. And that's almost as many as about right and not enough combined, 43%. Now, to rub a little salt in the wounds, here are some stats from deeper into the weeds. Among those who say that corporations are not giving enough attention to transgender issues, only 28% of them say they'll be buying more Bud Light now, and almost as many, 22%, say less. And get this one, among those who say they are more likely to buy Bud Light because of the Dylan Mulvaney debacle, 80% of them still support the boycott of Anheuser-Busch. And finally, let's close on an oldie but goodie. From April 2021, is it a good idea or a bad idea for corporations to become involved in political controversies? Overall, 62% of Americans say it's a bad idea, and only 20% say a good idea. And although Republicans and independents almost equally agree by a majority that it's a bad idea, a majority of Democrats also agree, and only 31% of Democrats say it's a bad idea. Is this a political controversy? Well, it's probably safe to say that Anheuser-Busch marketing executives thought it wasn't. But I think it's pretty clear that there are objectively more Democrat politicians than Republican politicians who support the entire LGBT platform. We have tons of polling showing that a large chunk of the Democrat electorate is not in favor of the entire gender agenda. In fact, it's about the same amount that now support boycotting Anheuser-Busch over the issue. So whether or not Democrats will break with their party in the voting booth over issues like this that they disagree with, it looks like there isn't much of a problem voicing their displeasure to corporations. With the ongoing struggles with Bud Light sales and the Anheuser-Busch stock price, it looks like this story might be sticking around a bit. If there are any angles you want us to explore, please post your ideas in the YouTube comments. Please subscribe, like the video, and follow us on Twitter. And thanks for watching.